At E3 2021, Nintendo ended with their classic One More Thing, and it was more of a reveal for the sequel for Breath of the Wild, meant to be coming out in 2022. And according to some metric I heard somewhere, which is probably about the most reliable phrase anyone has ever said, that game, currently referred to as Breath of the Wild 2 by a lot of us, was the most talked about game on Twitter after E3. Maybe aside from Elden Ring, I don't really know. There were theory videos put up, we did something like one of our own, but with a twist, and the whole shebang. It was a great One More Thing, but you know what? It's 2 weeks later, and although people are still making content about and excited for that game, and it will ultimately have been my favorite game from what we saw at E3 once it releases, it's not the game that I'm seeing the most excitement for and conversation about from that showing here and now. That, by a far margin, is instead Metroid Dread. And while on one hand I'm not surprised, I am very happy about it, and it's with good cause, because Metroid Dread is going to change everything for the series. I mentioned in my video last week that I was going to be making this video and to subscribe to watch this one and another one we've got in the works as a more direct follow-up from that video. And if you're here from that video specifically, let me know in the comments. And if you're new, please consider subscribing. YouTube's algorithm has not been super kind to us since I got back from paternity leave, so any and all engagement would be incredibly helpful to put us in the good graces of the AI yet again. But speaking of last week's video, let's pick up from where I left off there. The premise last week was that Nintendo is finally revitalizing franchises that have been largely or completely dormant and using third-party studios to do so, first by remaking and modernizing an old title, and then making a brand new one in the series. Advance Wars Reboot Camp and Famicom Detective Club are direct examples of the first half of this, and Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Dread are the culmination of it. I'll link that video in the end card if you want to get the deep dive and watch it after this one, but where I mentioned I was pleasantly surprised was in Nintendo's willingness to really invest in the production and, almost more importantly, the marketing for Metroid Dread, especially after Samus Returns not blowing the doors open for the franchise like Nintendo may have hoped. As a remake of the Game Boy title, Metroid 2, Samus Returns is widely praised for making the weakest game in the series be super fun and introduce some really great mechanics to the series, like free aiming and melee counters. So gameplay-wise, Mercury Steam knocked it out of the park. But after selling somewhere in the 500,000 units range, it sold pretty low even for a Metroid game. It's pretty much common knowledge at this point, but despite its storied history and status, Metroid sales peaked at 2.8 million with the first Metroid Prime and 2.7 million with the NES Metroid. So especially after explicitly trying to modernize the series with Samus Returns, I wouldn't have been too surprised for Nintendo to see a series that's objectively selling worse as it goes on and just not doubling down, which is why I'm so thrilled that they did. As we can only assume, they must have understood the poor release circumstances of the game, that despite their best efforts, no 3DS games coming out after March 3rd of 2017 had any chance at resounding success. But you know, it's maybe for the best, because as long as that didn't dissuade them from really investing in Metroid, 2D or otherwise, it's good that the first Switch Metroid game that is really getting the conversation going will be a brand new title. That won't remove all scrutiny from the game, as we'll talk about later, but it does make it significantly more exciting, which brings us to a really important concept specifically for Metroid here today: hype. I definitely wouldn't say hype is always a good thing, especially when it's for something like predictions on the content of a Nintendo Direct, seeing as that would be hypothetical. I'm a dad, I'm allowed now. But without getting into a dissection of what kind of hype is good or bad, needless to say that the groundswell about Metroid on Switch since the reveal of the Metroid Prime 4 PNG in 2017 has been palpable. I am in incredibly good company of Switch owners over the last 4 years who have repeatedly said, like me, that although I've only ever dipped my toe in the Metroid series, the next big release on Switch would be when I really dive in and give it a fair shake. And I really mean, I see people who feel this same way like every day on Twitter. And here's my hype hypothesis, okay, I'll stop with that now, on why I think that is. If we look at the timeline of Metroid, in its heyday, there was a game on the NES in 1986, Game Boy in 91, SNES in 94, then a little gap, and GBA and GameCube both in 2002, both on those platforms again in 2004, and a spin-off in 2006, and then on the Wii in 2007. And it's easy to imagine that in those days, someone could easily feel like if they don't want to hop on for whatever next game is out, they'll just try the one after that. Like I see with a lot of gamers that want to give Pokemon a try, but the current release never quite looks like the one for them. But as far as the new games, it seems like Nintendo felt like they had to reinvent the wheel to be able to hopefully crack that 3 million unit mark they were never able to hit. And thus, Metroid Other M was born, and in 2016, Federation Force. At this point, in 2017, even though Metroid may not have been technically gone for that long, it had been 10 years since what felt like a traditional game, especially when the series has been so regular for so long. And that's why the hype for Metroid Prime 4, the first HD game in the series, as far as we knew, was so high. And like I said, that excitement specifically helps the series because since June of 2017, Metroid has been a staple in conversations when talking about Switch games. Every E3, every Direct, and Game Award at least, the topic of this series comes up. And not only does absence make the heart go fonder for fans of the series, but curiosity is also building in others. So that's something for Metroid as a whole that it has going for it moving forward. But not only that, it's releasing on the Switch, which notoriously just sells games. Mario Kart 8 is the best-selling Mario Kart, even though it's just an enhanced port of the Wii U game. Mario Odyssey is the best-selling 3D Mario. Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda game. Animal Crossing New Horizons is the best-selling Animal Crossing game. Luigi's Mansion is by far the best-selling in its 3 installments. Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, Kirby, except for the Game Boy title, Smash, Mario Party, Pikmin, the list literally goes on. And yes, Metroid has never broken 3 million units sold. But this is where this conversation is about to get really interesting, because Metroid Dread will undoubtedly crack that threshold. By how much, I'm not sure. Whether a 2 times increase like Zelda, or 3 times increase like Animal Crossing, or more minimal like Fire Emblem or Xenoblade or Paper Mario. But even if Metroid Dread only sells 3 or 4 million, that's still absolutely a success to Nintendo. They can't realistically set their sales expectations any higher than the historically top-selling title, but their hopes could certainly be set higher. And the way I see it, the reception to this game and later down the road, Metroid Prime 4, will almost be like Kickstarter stretch goals to Nintendo. But first, let's talk about the couple of things that could throw a wrench in the success of the game. The first one that seems like it actually won't be an issue but could have been if things had gone differently, and that's just that Nintendo can sometimes make and release great games, but completely botch the marketing. Whether they release the game right next to a bigger release so it gets overshadowed, or they just don't talk about it much, or don't show the best qualities of the game, or whatever else, a lot of games haven't gotten the success they could have if it weren't for that. But once E3 was over, Nintendo literally branded their Twitter after Samus and Metroid Dread for a little while and has been talking about it all over. So that's not a concern at all. Also in Nintendo's control, but we can't officially know until later, the game should really be the best that it can be. After what we saw of this game and the experience with Samus Returns, that really shouldn't be an issue, but whether or not the game is critically successful will really help tip people over the edge that are currently on the fence. So really, the one thing that could be working against this game is already underway, and that's the super repetitive and, in my opinion, fairly annoying conversation of, is this game worth its price tag intrinsically? Like I said, this is already going on here and there on Twitter, amongst other places, and the fact that the game is 3D models with 3D cutscenes and seemingly a fleshed out world with cool mechanics and exploration and a game design and atmosphere apparently doesn't matter because the gameplay is in 2D. Our friend Rob over at Rule of Two Review, who really should be your #1 source for Metroid stuff, made a great video breaking down this specific topic. But to me, the biggest argument to break this down is that people are fine with paying $60 for Smash, or a brand new 2D Mario, or a brand new 2D Donkey Kong. So what's the difference here? Another factor that has been brought up is just that we haven't had a AAA 2D Metroidvania game in an incredibly long time. And in the meantime, we've gotten a lot of indie Metroidvanias like Ori, Hollow Knight, Blasphemous, and a bunch more. But here's the long and short of it. Even if those games are as good as a 2D Metroid, which, as someone who loves Hollow Knight and hasn't even invested in Metroid yet, I could see as a valid stance, on a marketing level, a brand new indie IP just can't afford to sell itself at $60. Now, if you hear about Hollow Knight, someone says it's a great Metroidvania and it's only $15, which is a selling point for the game. They don't have a precedent in their own company to set or uphold, and this way can underpromise and overdeliver. But the simple fact is that Nintendo just prices their games at the standard full price unless they really don't believe the market will pay it, like for Captain Toad or WarioWare. But to them, Metroid is obviously a full price IP just like 2D Mario or 2D Donkey Kong or Smash. So this discourse could have hurt the sales, but from what we see from the Amazon sales charts, amongst other things, it hasn't actually hurt them, so that's great. But what I think is most interesting and most directly answers that thesis statement that Metroid Dread will change everything for the series is that if it finds the success that I'm positive it will, Nintendo will be able to invest that much more in the series. I think the health of a Nintendo IP can often be seen through the number of spin-off games it receives. Mario is the ultimate example, of course, but even Zelda in its peak popularity now getting games like Age of Calamity, or even Metroid when it was a core series for Nintendo got Metroid Prime Pinball and Metroid Prime Hunters. And you know what? I'd argue that even Metroid Other M and Federation Force would have been received way better if they were spin-offs between mainline games rather than the only Metroid titles for the time being. In the same way that Mario 3D World is better received now after Odyssey. So the future that I hope we see is that Metroid Dread comes out this year and sells just shy of 5 million copies by December 2021, likely with a decent tail in years to come. And then before the year's up, we see a short trailer for Metroid Prime 4 with no release date, so we assume it's for 2023 or something, but with a reveal and dated trailer for Prime Trilogy HD for 2022. And doing Dread first really does do a good job of maintaining excitement for Prime 4, because even though people are really looking forward to this game, I think a lot of people will still feel like the feature presentation will be Prime 4 when it releases. And as we talk about this on the channel all the time, although we haven't made a whole video going over it, but maybe we will, so you should subscribe. We're positive that they're building Metroid Prime 4 with a fine-tooth comb, making it the perfect release so as to achieve the highest possible level of success the series have ever seen, especially echoing how they approach Breath of the Wild. But past Prime 4, I think that starting with Metroid Dread pending these games' success, Metroid will once again become a core and recurring franchise for Nintendo with new games every few years and some spin-offs here and there to fill those gap years. Metroid producer Sakamoto said himself that although Dread is the conclusion of this story arc, he plans for more games down the road. Metroid is about to find new life, and it all starts with Metroid Dread on the Nintendo Switch. But that's what I think. What do you think? Is Metroid Dread the game to bring the series back into Nintendo's heavy rotation, or do you think the sales will be about the same as always, and Nintendo will lose faith in this franchise once again? Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and we've got our podcast on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and some of the comments that you leave down there, we'll pull them and talk about them on our podcast. Thanks so much for watching the video. See you next time. Peace and blessings.